Hello, 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 everybody. It is so good to see all of your digital non-existent faces in the chat. My name is Connie. My pronouns are they, he, and she, and I will be the panel mod for this particular panel number 2, Representin Nerd Life, where our topic is discussing how we, as BIMPOC creators in tabletop roleplay games, create our own spaces in the absence of welcoming tables for Black and or Asian players. My pronouns are they, he, and she. As I mentioned, you can find me on Twitter and on Itch at by Connie Chong. I am also the GM and executive producer behind the channel that is hosting this event, Transplanar RPG. We are an all transgender, people of color led, 100% homebrew Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition live streamed actual play campaign set in an original non-colonial anti-orientalist world. Our next stream is this Saturday at 3 p.m. US Central Time. So give us a follow if you want, and tune in for the next episode of our Arc 3 shenanigans. With my personal introduction out of the way, I will pass along introductions to the rest of this lovely panelist group. Feel free to plug your shit like as much as you can. If you've got projects coming up, streams coming up, Kickstarters you're a part of, like an art, like art commissions open, plug that shit, because we want to support and give you as much love as possible. So let's pass along introductions clockwise on the overlay, starting with Nordin Ali Kadir.
Hey, my name is Nordin Ali Kadir. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a tabletop writer, designer, tons of things. For this, it's important to mention that I do a lot of community organizing. So I'm a part of Utopia, and I help organize that. I community mod over on Asians Represent, and I did a lot of in-person things before, well, everything. So I have a lot of experience in this area. You might also have seen my face on various streams and panels. I do quite a lot. I'm in a Kickstarter right now, which I'm excited about. You know what? I'm going to just put that in the chat. It's a selection of micro settings for Monster Hearts 2. We have actually already hit our goal, but if we just get a little more, we can make it a dual language book and translate into Spanish, which I'm hoping we do, because in my mind, translations are an accessibility tool, as well as just, something nice to have. So, thank you. Super excited.
Awesome. Thank you for that amazing introduction, Nordin Ali. Let's pass things along to Jay.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me on here. My name is Jay. I also go by Nala. I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at NalaWoo. I also post my artwork on Twitter at NalaDraws and on pretty much every other social media that an artist might have, like Instagram, Artful, ArtStation, etc., etc. My portfolio is viewable on naladraws.com. I got a domain name this year. I'm very excited about it. I do freelance illustration, character design, concept art, and visual development for games and animation. And I am looking for freelance opportunities come this summer, mid to late June. I will also be opening personal commissions for the first time in a long time this summer. And you can check out the pinned tweet on at NalaDraws on Twitter, my pinned thread. I have a mailing list that you can add yourself to be first notified when these commissions open. I don't open personal commissions very often, so get on that. I'm super excited to be here with all these lovely people, and I hope to see you around on the interwebs.
Awesome. Yes, definitely check out Jay's artwork. They're amazing. And now let's pass along introductions to Kalia.
Hello. I am here representing the cohort of the Dicey Amazons. We have this whole thing, like watching Mitzi spell cohort so many different ways. It's just hilarious. So we are a group of non-binary people, of women of color, and we do all kinds of things. My show on Tuesdays at 7 Central. Come check it out. I talk about all things nerd, so movies and comic books and poetry and sometimes news. If I feel a little ranty, it's a thing. It's been known to happen. So I'm really excited to be here. Day job is teaching history, so I really am a fan of increasing awareness of other perspectives. Yes, Peku, cohort. But I'm really excited to be here, and special shout out to Kupo for making me aware that this was a thing, and Connie for opening the door.
Absolutely. You're very, very welcome, Kalia. And now going to pass along introductions to Kappa. Kappa, I believe you're muted.
I am muted. Oh no. Okay, well that would just okay. Take two. Hi, my name is Christian, better known as Kappa in the TTRPG space. You can find me on Twitter at the Kappa Chris, and yeah, so I do a lot of community stuff. I like participating in charity events and all these wonderful things because my whole platform is wanting to give marginalized voices a platform, give them spaces, give them community, uplift their voices in any way possible because that's what I do in my day job. You can also find me on, let's see, I have a couple of things. Fridays on Roads Uncharted, anywhere you can find your favorite podcast. It's an actual play in the Genesis system. You can also find me on Wednesdays on Kevin Kudo's channel for Revenge of the Crit, a Star Wars D&D Star Wars game in the D&D sort of realm. And yeah, so yeah, that's where you can find me. You can also find me in the next panel as well. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I'm not as well established as everyone else here, but I feel like I give a very good, interesting perspective because I'm trying to do something, and I'm near this. I'm in the start of the journey here. I'm dipping my toes specifically into production and maybe some voice acting.
Yes, listen to the sweet dulcet tones of Kappa on his incredible microphone, the sweet sultry voice of Kappa. But yeah, toss some love to everyone here on the overlay. Check out all of our social media accounts and follow us, support everyone here. We are all fantastic, and I'm going to toot our own horns collectively. So with that out of the way, I'm going to bring everyone's attention to the yellow bar at the bottom of the overlay. Our donation goal was originally $1,000 for the entire event. We smashed through $1,205 at the very beginning with Welcome to Kung Fu Island. So I'm hoping, can we get some more donations going there for Representin Nerd Life? That would be amazing. And thank you to everyone who has given so far. You all are amazing. Every single dollar will go toward two amazing fundraisers / organizations. The first is the Tamir E. Rice Foundation, which supports after-school programming for Black and Brown youth, as well as advocating for police reform in Cleveland, Ohio. And the second organization is rather a fundraiser, an emergency relief fund for sex workers and survivors in Hawaii, organized by Affirm Hawaii, which is an anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist feminist organization based out of Hawaii. Both of these causes are incredible, and all of the money will go split evenly between them. So thank you so much to everyone who's contributed so far, and to those who will contribute, because I see you out there lurking in chat. So with that out of the way, let's hop into our first discussion questions for Representin Nerd Life. And you can drop questions in the audience. I might be grabbing some that stand out to us. But for now, let's start with question number 1. So, to the table at large, what are some situations, right, that may have caused you specifically to avoid pursuing your TTRPG interests?
Thing. That's definitely a thing. I'll jump in if everybody's okay with that.
Please do.
Please.
So there's a few different factors in my personal life, my background. My dad was hyper conservative and like evangelical, right? So that meant everything was demonic and satanic. So there was that threshold. And then once I got older and realized maybe that was not factual, into my adulthood, the spaces where I found I was like, I just don't have the energy to make myself go into these spaces and prove or fit in or whatever it is. It just white male dominated spaces, not the energy it would take. So because of that, they might call a late bloomer. But yeah, it all started way back in the day with good old dad telling me that everything was satanic and that you shouldn't do those things. So, but you know, he's very proud. It's not of where I am right now.
That resonates with me a lot because I also come from a fairly, evangelical religious background. But overlaid on top of that is this whole idea of capitalism, you're not worth much if you're not productive. And so pursuing hobbies and like video games and all that stuff wasn't productive to my career or getting me more money for whatever reason. And so a lot of that was just kind of a lot of my start was getting over myself and just like deciding that this is something that I would like, I should dedicate my time to because it is fulfilling, as opposed to as opposed to not pursuing this space because it is not productive. We know that's wrong because it's productive to make spaces for people or productive to do something that you love. But yeah, that's kind of for me the biggest roadblock in avoiding interests, TTRPG things, like huge other things. But for me, I think that was the largest contributor.
I want to tack another one on to the religious background to queer trans pipeline shebang. I was raised Catholic, but my parents didn't really know about tabletop games. Like, I remember playing an extremely watered down version of Dungeons and Dragons when I was like in elementary school. Like, we had like a map grid and we rolled dice to see how many spaces we could move around. I don't even know like where they got those rules from. I don't know I don't know what it was, but they called it Dungeons and Dragons, and that was my first exposure to it. But I quickly forgot about that because it wasn't the full game. It was literally just a dungeon crawl. I didn't find it very fun, and the boys I was playing with did not want to explain the rules to me. So, culmination of things. But then I revisited it back in like the end of high school because my friend was like, "I want to play this game, Dungeons and Dragons," and I didn't really know what it was, but we all started playing together. And then once I got to college, there was a lot more people here who played. I think like one of the biggest barriers I had though was just like how white the source material was at the beginning. And the winter of my freshman year of college, when I decided that I wanted to GM for the first time, I wanted to tell a story. I was extremely like, I felt extremely intimidated because I didn't have any background for like typical high fantasy things. I found like Tolkien and all those other like it's mainly The Hobbit, like Tolkien world. I didn't ever read that because I didn't see like it just wasn't interesting to me. It was so white, so Eurocentric, so straight. I never really read fantasy in high school or anything, just because it just wasn't interesting to me. It was too white. And so when it finally came to be my turn to GM, I didn't have any of this background on like all the lore that was like pre-established or whatever. And so I decided that I didn't want my players to like tell me I was doing it wrong, or I was afraid of getting it wrong for all this like pre-established stuff that I had no background on. So I decided to write my own setting, which I've been working on for like 6 years now. But I decided to set my games in this setting of mine called Arumbai, and doing that really helped open up the world of roleplay games for me, because I think my biggest barrier was just how white fantasy, the genre as a whole, is. And to me, as someone who is queer and trans and a person of color, I didn't see anyone like me, and it was just so uninteresting. But I think once I figured out that I could throw that all out the window and do my own thing, it became a lot more accessible and a lot more interesting. And I have fallen so far deep into this hole, and I love it here.
So I guess I'm going to be the one to say I did see myself in fantasy. I just saw myself as the villain on a consistent basis. So in Tolkien, hello, I look like an Easterling, one of those swarthy people with brown eyes and who ride elephants, I guess, which, I mean, that's not necessarily wrong, but you see my point. That's a constant thing whenever I enter a space that's not necessarily made welcome for me. I see humans, like human characters in fantasy, who look like me and who are definitively the enemy, to the point where they're described as barbaric or savage, and on and on and on. So it made my ability to walk into spaces limited and a bit scary. In addition to that, if I may, I'm going to diversify into LARP for a second, because you'll be surprised how many LARPs advertise with people who look like me. Zero. And LARP is what I've wanted to do. I love acting. I love improvisation. I love playing with scene partners. It's perfectly tailored to me in a sense. But I didn't do it because no one like me did. And the few times it was shown on TV that someone like me did, it wasn't exactly shown in a positive light. So I had two things to combat with. I had the lack of ability to find people who did this, and lack of trust in the source material, to not portray me as a constant, consistent villain. And I'll be honest, some of my first games decidedly just did that for a bit. So I think one of the reasons why I got so heavy into community organizing is because I've had the bad experiences, and I have no intention of letting people wander themselves into situations like that as long as I can stop it.
You brought up a really good point, and I want to add on to my thing about the terrible Asian representation in fantasy. I didn't. Yeah, that's a whole other beast. Shout out to Asians Represent for tackling all that. It's a mess, and I guess I just completely blocked it out because I forgot to mention it. But yes, that is true. I feel like the exotic, the whole exotic thing is just so.
The mysticism of the East.
Yes, the Orient. Oh, like all of that is. It really portrays the people who look like us in a certain way that I didn't identify with at all. And then you couple that with all the other layers to my own identity and my own relationship to my Asian identity. I was adopted, so that there's just a whole lot of trauma there. But it's rough.
It is fascinating to me how, for a lot of Asians, we do see ourselves, we just see ourselves wrong. But it's even the people who don't see themselves as people, get portrayed as different. I'm going to use the term race here, even though we should be using the term species, because that's how the most popular games tend to call them. See themselves as different races. Not every single race tends to pull from stereotypes from, cultures of color. And some of the worst portrayed ones tend to pull themselves from darker cultures, specifically Black cultures, Native cultures, and in some cases, way back when, Mongolian, although that's shifted. Which, that's the thing about making spaces for ourselves. We kind of had to, because Lord knows no one else was going to do it for us. We've had to push and pull our way into here.
Yeah.
And
I think the space. Oh, sorry.
No, sure. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that the spaces that are created, or the stories that are created, were created by people who aren't us, and again rely heavily on stereotypes. And I remember when I first joined this space, I would be complaining about the lack of representation of queer Asian peoples. And I remember being like, yeah, there's no Asian people. And people would be like, no, there is. Look at this really racist thing, or this thing made by a really racist guy. Look at these. You are represented. And isn't that a good... Right, yeah. But they'd point to it and be like, look, no, you are represented. And it's like, what is this?
And then the same folks are going to get mad at you for not understanding the history, like you said, Tolkien and other Eurocentric stories and perspective, and not and then gatekeeping you out of it. Shout out to Starchmonger in chat earlier saying shout out to the white dudes who don't consider you a real nerd if you're not well versed in the Lord of the Rings universe. That one, okay. That's another thing. Gatekeeping was huge. I didn't want to step into the TTRPG space because I didn't read The Hobbit, or I didn't read whatever IP or book series that everyone else seemed to that were in the TTRPG space and were represented by Wizards of the Coast or whatever. I just felt like I needed to catch up, and I was never going to do it, and so I just didn't try.
Yeah.
Not until very recently.
I have never read
Yeah.
or watched Lord of the Rings, and I don't plan on it.
They don't tell you about that stuff. And this is where that colonial context, the only reason these books, not saying they don't have their place, but the only reason these books are held in quote unquote nerd culture, white nerd culture, the way they are is because they are white sources. Like it's like a cyclical self-affirmation thing where we create the art. So we get to say this art is a good thing and that any art you create should mimic this art over here. It does not leave a space for characters to even exist. So I didn't see myself necessarily as the victim. I was definitely, if I did see someone that looked like me, and I'm talking about the privileged space here as well of being lighter skinned as a Black woman, it was for use. What can they use you for some context of the story? But it was never as an autonomous, powerful entity that was doing anything useful.
Mm.
And I think that it's important for non-Asian communities to recognize, speaking as a Black woman, that we still participate in a lot of those stereotype support systems. Because we don't know any other representations necessarily of Asianness, Pacific Islanderness either. And so we look at those same stereotypes that hurt you in the heart and we're like, oh, that's awesome. Completely ignorant of the potential history in that. So I think it's a space where there's a privilege in not necessarily experiencing that, but also understanding that we can't be so focused on our path. And I think that's kind of the thing we're doing today, segue, putting all of these groups of people together to show where there's overlap and where each group needs to maybe do better.
Yeah, I mean, what you just said about how non-Asians should think twice before just passing forward the stereotypes they've seen. I absolutely think Asians are, some of our communities, even the ones that grew up here, we saw what was handed to us, a load of stereotypes and, to be honest, nonsense, and we repeated it without thinking. And I think that's a consistent thing that people of color really do need to remember, that one of the ways we need to express solidarity is taking a step back and looking at the ways that we've been force-fed some poor thoughts and reminding ourselves that we owe it to ourselves and to those around us to do better.
For sure.
100%. I think that's actually a really great segue into the second question we have here, which is, how did you all first start to create your own welcoming space in TTRPGs? We've talked a lot about the roadblocks, the gatekeeping, the reasons why there have not been, welcoming spaces for Black and Asian, other people of color in tabletop LARP and other creative spaces. So I really want to now pivot toward something perhaps a little bit more joyful, right? Like in the face of all this adversity, right? In the face of all this like pain and all right, maybe this isn't for me. How have y'all started carving out space for yourselves?
I walked in, flipped my hair, and said, "This is mine now."
I just took it right there.
Yeah, I think way back in 2019, that's kind of when I first started really becoming active in the Twitter space. I wrote a really long thread about, it was called things that make me want to leave a D&D game. And it was just a list, and I was literally in bed writing things. I don't know why, but all the threads of mine that get spread around the most were usually written by me as I just woke up. But anyways, I was just ranting, and I was and I was expressing just my frustration at the amount of racism and queerphobia and transphobia that exists in typical Dungeons and Dragons games. And this was back when I played D&D. I don't necessarily play that game anymore. But I just wrote a long thread about the things that make me upset. And that thread took off. And I was getting tons of messages, a lot supportive, a lot negative, people who were calling me racist for saying things are racist and all the gatekeeping and all the other stuff. And but like that I kind of see as like me taking my first stance in this space against all of that, all the isms, all that stuff. And I made it clear, at least for myself and also for those who were around me in my space at the time, that none of that stuff is okay. And that I personally, as a creator, am going to be working towards creating content, creating art, creating stories, and writing that are more representative of marginalized groups and portrays us as more well-rounded people, and you know, like that shows like how truly diverse and beautiful all of our cultures are without relying on stereotypes and whatnot. And that's also goes into like the development of that fantasy setting that I've been working on that I mentioned earlier. I don't want to take up too much time talking about it, but TLDR, rocky relationship with religion growing up, and also me wanting to see a fantasy setting that was not Eurocentric, or had like white people in it. So I created a fantasy culture and setting. The most finished and developed part was actually this religion. It's a polytheistic worshipping of 8 female deities. I wanted to create like a matriarchal society in contrast to the patriarchal society that I was raised in. Blah 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 blah. I'm very proud of the religion. And it's something that I would love to talk about more. I need to like finish writing stuff down, but yeah, that's that. And I think creating that was very empowering for me. And I need to go back and rewrite a lot of stuff because sensitivity reading and all the other stuff is really important. So, but yeah, that's me, I guess.
That sounds rad. I would love to play that in that setting. That sounds so cool.
Someday, when I find a game system that I'm comfortable running and can run this fantasy thing, I would love to run an all POC game in this setting. I think that would be really fun.
Look out for that, chat.
Someday.
I think for me, so the question is, how did you first start to create your own welcoming space in TTRPGs? I am very much, I consider myself very much still learning how to do that, how to start it off, because one, I don't know what sort of creation I want to be a part of. I do a lot of streaming on other people's channels and trying my best to tell the stories that represent my perspective, because my perspective is one that comes from an Asian culture, and trying to figure out my place in in a society that does not welcome that in the best light. So I think some of the stuff that I wanted to do. Okay, so I should back up a little bit. I got my first start in creating communities in video games, making spaces for people to play together. And when you do that in video games, you get a lot. You get a lot of just hate being thrown around. One, for not even for just being a bad player in like Destiny or Overwatch or whatever. You get a lot of hate just because you sound a certain way. If you sound really young, you sound like you sound like a girl. You have an accent that isn't that doesn't sound like this. It showed me that there is a need for people to learn. And so that's kind of like where I started in the TTRPG space. I wanted to teach people that there are other perspectives that aren't represented, that are fulfilling, that are interesting through the stories that we tell. One of the projects that I'm a part of, Roads Uncharted, shout out to Roads Uncharted and Dax, the GM, working together with her to really nail down the story that I wanted to tell through my case. And then from there, and what's it called? Teaching people and saying and having people understand why why the perspective is different and why it's important that we are represented. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of went on a tangent there, and so that's all to say that I'm still learning. I'm trying my best to give spaces and do it in a way that isn't appropriative or performative. I think that's really important, because we have, sorry, burp. Because we have,
Bless you.
thank you. We have responsibility to do so. Given the platform that we have for other people that look like us that are kind of scared to do it, it can be done. I was inspired by the folks that made Sina Una. Shout out to those folks. That I never expected to see a RPG setting set in the Philippines. I never expected to see my culture represented in D&D. So taking inspiration from that, wanting to give that to other people that don't necessarily have the same opportunities to do so, and making those spaces for them.
Awesome.
Uno looks amazing. I haven't had a chance to like look at it or get it, but I keep seeing like the cover art. I don't know who the artist was, but well, it looks beautiful. On that same vein, I'd love to give a shout out to the Unbreakable anthology, which is the all Asian created own voices stories. The volume 1 is for D&D 5th edition, and it's all Asian writers and artists. Unbreakable's great. I was lucky enough to be an artist on volume 2, which is coming at some point soon. The Kickstarter will be up, and I'm sure all of us will be screaming about it. So y'all should check that out. Volume 1 is for sale. I don't know where you can buy it. I'm the worst. I think it's on Drive-Thru RPG. I don't know, but if you Google it, you can
you
find
have the power
it.
of the internet in the palm of your
Yes.
hands. Literally, you can
The
find
power
it.
of the internet. Yeah.
For sure. I'd love to hear from Kalia and Norden
to do
Ali
that.
about this.
I just had to put it in the chat. Everything is glitching, so I appreciate you guys sticking with me while technology decides that I didn't need it today. One of the things, and Kappa, you touched on it earlier, and actually, Jay, you did too. So it's this idea of sometimes it's literally going and grabbing the other people that look like you and saying, hey, this is a space for you. Because I was very interested. This was, I guess, however many years ago now, 3, not that long. I've not been playing RPGs very long. But I was at a poetry event, and our illustrious Sith Lord Candy was there, and we got to talking, and I was like, yeah, I've wanted to learn and play and all of this. I've just not had the energy to force myself into these spaces. One of the pieces of intersectionality is me being a cis woman means that these male dominated spaces, even if there is Black people there, don't necessarily mean it's more inviting for me. But Candy was there, and it was like, hey, I don't mind teaching you. Come, and a few weeks later, I get a message, and we're all sitting down, and I'm like, ooh, warlocks sound amazing, and I'm going through all of this stuff. So for all of us who've made it into a welcoming space, I think it's so important for us to find and be open and talking. And I know nerds can nerd out. Like we got that. Like that's what we do. But making it so it's not gatekeeping, and we don't flood people with a barrage of information that they don't know what to do with. Like bring them in at a pace that someone can feel comfortable with, so they know they don't have to know all of this extra lore and all of the other things that we sometimes do with, hearing me go off about Star Trek.
I love Star Trek.
Whole thing, you're like, I've never seen that, but you need to. Right? So I understand how nerds can flood, but being opening, yes, grabbing people and pulling them in, making them aware that there are spaces that are being created every single day. Every single day, new BIMPOC nerd spaces are being created. And when you find one, share, like share, share,
Mhm.
share. So that person who's still kind of on the fringe looking doesn't feel so alienated.
Yeah. Yeah. I the sharing thing is so for me, I haven't created many spaces. Uh I'm usually brought on to help curate and maintain spaces. And that's a hint for a panel I'll be on tomorrow. Uh as such, there's a couple things that I always like to point out. One, it's about visibility in terms of who you're advertising with. And advertising is not like you're buying a billboard. It can mean if you're streaming games, who's on those games? Do they look like the people who you want to be attending your spaces, or do they not? If you are printing advertising, etc., etc., even for smaller things, who's the one speaking up? Who's excited about your space? Because if it's only white folks, some of us are going to say, you know what, I'll give that one a pass. And I'll be honest, I have done that. I, a person who's been in this space for years now, I've done that. I've done that, probably this month. I've seen a space, seen how white it is, and said, you know what? I don't know if I'd feel safe there. I don't know if that space is for me. And then backed right out.
Yeah, that
So,
was. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
so, that is definitely a factor in terms of creating spaces. What does it already look like, and how does it present itself? The other thing is, what are you doing to protect the people inside? You know? But on top of it all, once you start doing that, you're going to find it's going to get easier and easier. Look, moderating and stuff, that stuff's hard. That's for a different conversation. But in terms of getting the ball running, if you have the right amount of joy in there, anything's possible. I mean, you'll get people sharing all sorts of random memes. You'll get people representing their cultures in games. You'll get people, talking about the best parts of their family experiences in terms of backstory. Once you start opening the door, there's a flood of talent and just joy and energy waiting for you to experience. That's the best part for me about these spaces. I get to see so much and learn so much and just share in happiness with so much in a way that, especially in the today times, can feel very hard.
Sure. I think something for me that over the course of me being here that I've sort of realized and had to learn is that in the very beginning I was surrounding myself with a lot of white people, partially because they're the ones who reached out slash down to me first to be like, yes, look, you are a young person of color, you can be with us and then we'll look good because we have a person of color. And like I don't want to like absolutely crap on these people, but like being in their spaces, like like Norden Ali was just saying, it didn't feel right, and I didn't realize what that weird feeling was until I stepped back from this. Actually, there's two channels that I was involved with, but I stepped back from both of these spaces, and I was like, "Hang on, I actually know what is making me feel uncomfortable. It's the fact that there's very little POC in leadership, but also just present in the community. I didn't feel welcome, and it wasn't necessarily anything negative that these white people did. It was just the fact that they're white and I'm not. And so when I finally stepped back from that and I found people, I found more POC, I surrounded myself with more people who looked like me, and more queer people too, because queer, trans, people of color, that is my group. Those are the best people that I've met here in this space, because we just have like an understanding, a mutual understanding of each other. And I don't feel like I have to explain myself or justify my identity to these people. Like inherently, I feel like people who share my marginalizations just understand me that much easier, and then feel more free to be myself.
I'd just like to punctuate that a little bit because it's very important. And if you're watching and you are not a person of color and you want to invite folks who are BIMPOC into your spaces and they keep leaving, that is an indicator that they do not feel safe for whatever reason. Now, I don't want to say go out and ask the few people of color in your spaces why that's happening. That is not their responsibility. But there are lots of resources. There are a lot of people offering education, offering insights into why that happens and how you can flip that switch. And I say flip a switch like it's easy. It is not. It is going to be very difficult. You're going to get a lot of backlash because we are just not welcome. Inherently not welcome in these spaces. So how can you make your spaces welcome for queer BIMPOC folks? That's the question. That is a huge question, and
Well,
I don't have those answers. Sorry. Go ahead, Kalia.
no. um, and I guess while we're giving free education and free labor to any white folks that might be watching, I swore in 2016, I was like, no more free labor from me, pay me. But one of the things you have to understand is that these queer that you think are just coming in to play a game are having a whole entire conversation in their head when they realize that they're the only person of color there. They're having a whole conversation like, what is the risk factor? What am I going to deal with, especially on a platform like Twitch? I've been that guest person, and in my Discord, in the Dicey Amazons Discord, I put I was like, okay, I have concerns. I don't know what this environment is going to be like. And it was just a one shot, right? Like, understand when you are inviting people into your space and they don't look like you and you don't have a reputation, and reputations do precede. And you don't have a reputation for inclusivity, there is a whole litany of questions and troubleshooting that they're doing before they even decide to step foot in your place. So once you get them there, if you don't do right, they're going to leave. Like, it just is what it is. But that's why I revert back to creating our own spaces and being open and excited about that. Yeah. I like that you guys gave those other examples. I'm going to watch the VOD later and find those.
I love the fact that, I love the fact that there are groups out there who are, majority white, who do want our input, who do want us there. But I think a lot of them forget to empower us. And if we're not empowered and we're the first person in your door, we can't open that door for other people. And that's another warning sign for us, right? I've been blessed. I've been really blessed to have been part of two of the first, all BIMPOC streams on two different channels. So I was on the Burn Bunch, a Monster of the Week game on Off the Table, which was all BIMPOC, and their first all BIMPOC game. And I'm on Gehenna Gaming currently in another all BIMPOC game of Monster Hearts 2 called Gehenna Academy. So, that's great. I've helped open the door, but they cautiously made sure that no one was opening the door alone. Right? Sure, they've had guests before of POC, but this was this was a conscious push. And that is the kind of push that makes sure that we don't ever feel like we're isolated because we're the only POC there. It makes sure that we feel empowered to bring even more people in because we know that at least the people around us share a lot of our views. And on top of that, it makes it so that if necessary, we can create a space within a space. And that's not, I want to kind of get rid of the idea that that's derogatory, because you'll find it happens a lot. Sometimes you need a space within a space. You need a place where people of marginalized gender, of which I'm not, by the way, can speak freely without feeling like a cisgendered man is going to walk into the room and talk over them. It's the same for almost any marginalization. And seeing that there, so long as they're still interacting with other spaces outside, is actually a good sign. Because it means that there's enough of us to validate such a space in the first place. That's the other thing about creating spaces. Sometimes it's not just creating your own space, it's creating a space within a space. And that's also a very good thing, because what it means is that you are encouraging new POC entering a space to stay because they know this place, no matter what, this is the place where I'm going to likely feel safe.
Yeah, like free advice also for the white people watching. I feel like if you want to make people like me feel comfortable, you need to be actively anti-racist. You need to be actively
Mhm.
anti-queerphobic. Because you can't just be like, oh, no politics exist here. Because while I do not believe my identity should be politicized, the fact of the matter is that it is. And you need to be like on it in your communities to make sure that nobody is going to be bigoted. You need to expel these bigots out of your space if you want people like me to feel welcome and comfortable. And that's a really hard thing for a lot of communities, I feel like, because they're like, oh, but we don't want to alienate people. I would just ask you, like, who are you worried about
Which
alienating?
makes
Like,
no sense.
like if you have a bunch of
No
Nazis
sense.
following you, like, first of all, think about why are the Nazis following you? And if you don't want Nazis following you, you need to make it very clear to these Nazis that they are not welcome here. And they will most likely leave or you will ban them.
But the numbers, they're going down. They're going down, the
Oh.
numbers.
Oh my
Oh
God.
no!
Well, you
Oh
know what?
no!
I will validate that one of those fears that sometimes the numbers do go down, and that is a scary thing for a lot of spaces. I'm not saying it's not, but those numbers are still they're going to bounce back up once more people who were not a part of that original group feel more comfortable. I think what we're all saying here, and I think it's important to say this out loud, is whether you're creating a space within a space, curating a space, or joining a space, what dictates how comfortable we all feel is the ability for the people in charge, even if that's us, to make active, conscientious choices. That's the big thing. They need to
Yeah.
be actively anti-racist, actively anti-queerphobic, actively moderating, actively inviting more POC in, actively encouraging more POC talent to take the forefront, actively encouraging POC leadership. It's about active work, which is a lot. I realize that's a lot.
And if you're wondering how, because there's always that question, and then the well-meaning person asks the designated POC, how do I do that? Google that shit. So much
Yeah.
information on the internet, on the Googles, if you will. It's a very large place with,
Look how tiny this
if
well
you
of
don't know,
information is.
I know. Your teacher said it would never be in your hands, and look, it's there. Um, but if you don't know how, take your ignorance to the internet. It's okay to be ignorant. It's a position we all start in. It's
Mhm.
okay. Figure out how to create those active anti-racist spaces, because you may want to be, but if you don't know enough to even recognize what racism looks like, because we're not talking about people who wave KKK banners, like that's not what we're talking about. As racist behavior, you can't be anti-racist. Like it's just an illogical assumption that you can do the work without knowing what it looks like. So Google that shit, learn, educate yourself. Go to the library, ask the librarian. They're awesome people. Figure out the first steps you can take. You can't just be anti-racist because you know you're supposed to be. That's not, it's not how it works. So just
Totally. And I know that our panel is coming close to an end here, and I would love to get all of your thoughts on the third discussion question here that we've got pre-gen, which is, what would you say to other people of color, Black, Indigenous, mixed race, people of color, Asian folks, etc., who are new to this, who want to get into TTRPGs or LARP, but maybe don't really know where to start or are finding it exclusionary, right? Like, what would be the advice you would give to yourself, like 3 years ago, or whatever amount of time it was, like when you were first entering these spaces?
Oh
If I
God.
could- Oh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'm gonna. I think I want to start off on the hard thing, so we're not talking about the hard thing consistently. Be
Mhm.
prepared to walk away from a certain space. Like seriously, if you feel uncomfortable, do not
Yeah.
explain anything to anyone if you don't want to. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. You walk out of there because your safety is the most important thing, and your safety, this initial safety, that's going to dictate a lot of your relationship going forward. The last thing you want is to have trauma from entering a space and carrying that with you because you don't deserve that. And it's going to not make it's your relationship with TTRPGs and LARP is going to be colored by it for some time. So be prepared and be comfortable and feel empowered to walk out the door when necessary.
For sure. Also, I would advise
And
any people who are new to the space and want to get in, do not do work for free. Do not do work for free. Your time is valuable, and people who are bigger in this space, whether they're intentionally doing it or not, might try to take advantage of you, take advantage of your kindness, of your intellect. That is valuable, and you should guard that. You need to get paid for the work you do, especially anything related to sensitivity reading, emotional labor, etc., etc., etc. Do not do that shit for free. They need to pay you, especially the white people. They got to pay you. Second of all, biggest piece of advice, if you are being asked to join a show, a panel, etc., I would ask who else is going to be on this panel. And for me, I never do something unless there is at least one or two other POC with me. And if I am the only trans person who's been invited to this panel, it is a big factor in me deciding whether or not I want to do it, because I want to be around people like me, and I, at this point, am not going to be on your cast. I'm not going to be on your show if I'm going to be the only POC there. Like, I just point blank, that does not make me feel comfortable. And at this point, that's the line that I have drawn for my own safety, my own comfort. And I wish I started doing that earlier, because there's a lot of issues with tokenization of POC, of queer people, etc. And I promise you, being on casts with entirely POC or
yes.
entirely queer people, entirely trans people, it is so much more empowering. And like I mentioned earlier, you'll feel so much more free to be yourself because these people will understand you. Also, join Utopia. Great Discord, great community. It's all POC. They do great work. Shout out to them at Utopia on Twitter. It's just Utopia, right? Or do they have like a little tag on the end?
I think it's Utopia TV on Twitter
Aha, yes, that.
because
Join that,
someone
check
took
it out.
Utopia.
Great stuff. That would definitely be my recommendation. I think the last thing I want to say is like look around for the other like quote unquote like big name POC etc. doing stuff in this space. Like see what kind of projects they're working on, and like participate in that sort of stuff. Definitely, yeah. Follow people who are not white. Follow people who are not cis or straight, etc. Diversify your following, because there are people like you out there. Like there's all of us. There's tons more people. But the biggest names in this space tend to be the white voices, the cisgender voices, the straight voices, or all of the above. And you can follow them. Sure, I'm not saying don't follow them, but diversify your following and you will get so much more information, so much more projects, diversity. Because I feel like there's a lot of people who sit around and be like, oh, there's no diversity. Or they'll name like the same one project of all POC multiple times when people are like, oh, do you have recommendations for diverse stuff? And they name the same thing. There is more than just that one same thing. There's so much stuff out there and you just got to look for it, because we are here. Boost us. And there's, yeah, good work.
I
In
kind of
that
want to
same, oh,
go ahead.
Go for it, Kalia.
are we going? Okay. In that same vein, understand the advantage. So I'm going to age myself. Rolling back to like the 80s, did not have internet like talking about. There is such an advantage of having the internet, big capital blinking lights, the internet. puts you, if you're looking for a space, one, if you are listening to me right now, you're already in one of those spaces. So good job, step one. Um, yes,
Welcome.
Dicey Amazons, join our Discord too. There is a one shot. If you want to test out tabletop RPGs and you aren't really sure, I'm going to give a shout out to Vibrant Legends, who does a once every other week. I think they're doing right now Saturdays on the Dicey Amazons Twitch channel. They do all different kinds of RPGs. Don't think D&D is the only one out there, right? But take advantage. Take advantage. There is much more. Just like Jay was talking about, there is much, much more than the big names, which is so weird in
Yeah.
like
For lack of better terminology, that's why I
my
use
brain
that.
occupies to know that there is big nerds out there. Yeah, so there are many more, and it's like pulling a thread. Once you start pulling that thread, the whole thing falls apart. And once you find the first person, it's only 2 or 3 more clicks until you get a whole plethora of other people. So take advantage of the resources. Don't be like me and wait 20, 30, 40 years before you find yourself in a space where you want to be. Like, take advantage of having access. If you're here right now, you are, I promise, 3 Discords, Utopia, Dicey Amazons, Vibrant Legends. You're only a few Discord clicks away from having so many different people who are involved in so many different things. And that's really remarkable. It really, really is. So please take advantage of that.
Yeah, I especially want to speak to the people of color out there. If you don't feel like you're seeing enough people who look like you, seriously, just enter who you're looking for in the search terms. In the search bar on Twitter, you'll find people. It's not that we're hard to find, it's that there are circumstances trying to prevent you from seeing us. And that's not your
Algorithms.
fault. That's not your fault. That's not anyone's fault. I mean, it's someone's fault, but it's not anyone's fault in terms of, the POC. But feel empowered to look for what you want. Straight up, just look for what you want. You will find something. You search POC and queer on Twitter, you'll find a bunch of people. Hell, you'll probably find me.
Heyo.
Right?
What
If
up?
you're looking for, Muslim TTRPG content, look at that. Type that into Twitter, type that into Google, you will find things.
Google that shit.
Again, you might find me. There is a whole world of possibilities out there, but it does unfortunately require that you click through, that you take a second gander, that you double check your search history. It's not fair, but at the same time, the rewards, mate, the rewards. Look around you. Look at all these wonderful people like here and in chat. And if you're watching this on YouTube, maybe in the comments, look at all those wonderful people. Tell me you don't want to know them. Of course you do. I want to know these people. And we're all there waiting for you. So
Yeah, there absolutely is space. Like, don't be worried about taking too much space, because we all know the white people take up all the space. So you will never take up too much space. You will never take up too much space. So come join us. We will make space for you. There is space here. Please don't be afraid.
100%. And Kappa, looked like you wanted to say something as well.
Oh, I mean, I can't say it better than anyone else here that has already spoken. Like, y'all are really smart. I'm really glad to be part of you. But something that I have been saying recently is unmute your mic. Ask people like we are queer and BIMPOC communities are looking for more people to introduce to the space because of how little we are represented. So unmute your mic. I mean that literally and figuratively. If you're in a Zoom call, whatever, remember, unmute your mic. But figuratively, put it out there. I want to play in more. I want to play in a BIMPOC, TTRPG, D&D, whatever. We will find you. Just saying. There and again, join Discords, find communities, Google that shit. But yeah, everyone said it way more eloquently than I can. So I'm just gonna put the little punctuation there. Remember, unmute your mic. You have so much power.
Totally. I wanted to actually, we've got like another like 8 minutes or so actually to like talk. I misread the clock, so we're pretty good on time for a little bit. But I wanted to circle back to something that came up earlier about like specifically about allies who are worried about like losing numbers, right? Or like hemorrhaging viewers or whatever by like making their spaces like not racist, right? Or like actively like anti-colonial. And if you're like, I want to be an ally, but like my Patreon though, but like my bottom line, newsflash, you're not a fucking ally. So like pick a side, right? Because like we didn't make the sides, you know, your ancestors did. Right. But, and sure, like maybe you didn't directly do it, but you are still reaping the benefits of white supremacy. Right. Like if you're not like combating it, you are upholding it. Like there really is no, which is also why I prefer the terminology like accomplice, right? Instead of ally, because ally is like, you're just there. You're like standing there, you know, like accomplice is an action.
Bring a sign to a parade once a year and then walk home, put that sign away, and they call it a day and they think they're doing a good job, and that's not it. I wrote a very long thread about allyship. You can find it on my Twitter, and it's in a if you go in my pinned thread on @Nalawu on Twitter, all the way at the bottom, I have a moment of educational threads, and my thread on allyship is there. If you want to be an ally and be an actual ally, please read that.
Yes, thank you for sharing that resource, Jay. And I've said this before on like other streams and stuff, but I'll say it again. I feel like us as like people of color, as Black and Asian folks, like we pass around the same $20 bill in the community, like toward our Ko-Fis, toward our Patreons, our Kickstarters. And like occasionally a white person might be like, I will give $5 to this and then like leave, right? So like, if you have the money, because like I'm gonna be real here, like some white nerds are freaking loaded. Like you know who you are. Like you know you're well off. Like we see you contributing to, you know, that racist Kickstarter. Like we see you staying silent. Like for real. Like if you know you have the means, right, and the access to like social media feeds where you hear about these projects, give. You know, please give. And speaking of which, thank you to everyone who's contributed so far. But go ahead. Yes, go ahead, Kappa.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Kalia.
I'm sorry. The delay is driving me crazy because I can't tell who's talking, and I try not to talk over people. I'm so sorry.
Right. It's all right.
But yes, so there's a lot of talk about finding the middle ground, and to what Connie is saying, there is no middle ground between racist and not. Like there is no point where we can agree to disagree on the middle of that. Like stop asking me to understand your position. That's not a thing. I will never understand how you're okay with this much racism versus like the KKK burning people shit down, right? Like there is no middle ground for that. So do not fix your face to say that you want to be an ally, anti-racist, and be okay with any margin of racism, queerphobia, any of that in your spaces. That's not how any of this works. That's the best thing to ever come out of Geico. That is not how any of this works, and you have to do better. There is no space for anything other than that, if that's what you actually want to do. If you want to hold on to your funding, do that, but be honest about that and say, I'm not willing to do the work. Don't blame us for your lack of people of color. Don't say, oh, they're not coming to my space. I invited them.
There's no racist light.
Yeah.
There's no.
You know what? I disagree slightly, but you're gonna hate. Like it's not gonna be much better. The middle ground between active racism and anti-racism is passive racism.
Yeah.
Which is still racism.
Yep. Still
So,
racist.
Yeah. Like if you're being quiet, you're upholding race. Think of it this way: if we're caught in a war and there's a front line, if you don't pick up a sword and you're seeing one side slowly die off, you are, in a way, supporting that side slowly dying off. And if you pretend to care about them even a little bit, do yourself a favor. Pick up a sword, pick up a bow, grab a cannon, do what you can. And that doesn't mean you have to be on the front lines every day, every week. Lord knows none of us can do that. We take steps back. But you need to stop there first before you're going to realize what the rhythm is and give yourself the ability to step back. Because that's what's the most important. Like, Lord knows we need money. If you want to give me money, feel free. And if you want me to sensitivity read for you for money, feel free. But it's not just money. It's about voices. It's about putting forward the right content. It's about retweets. It's about backing certain storylines that are different from what you're expecting. It is a constant battle.
Yeah.
Pick up a sword.
Yeah, there's a I'm gonna let them be anonymous, but one of the biggest RPG stream communities hired me to for like sensitivity reading, but they asked me to help them make their space more welcoming for marginalized people. And I did get paid. But I wrote them a very long document about things that they can do to make their community more accessible and more welcome. I talked to the creator of this space about accessibility, about being actively anti-racist, about weeding out people in their community. I even demanded accountability from some people that used to be in leadership there. I put it in the document. I'm like, these people need to make a public apology. Like, they really need to do that. I have since not seen that apology. I don't know if they've even taken any of my suggestions into account. All I did, they paid me. I gave them this big long document of stuff to do to improve their community. Because one of their things is that they were like, oh, well, no POC sign up for our stuff. And I'm like, you should do open casting calls. And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, if you do open casting calls and no POC are applying, then you need to circle back around to the whole, oh, your community is so utterly painfully white. Like, maybe that's why no one's applying. And they're like, well, how do we get POC applying if there's no POC here in the first place? And POC only want to come here if there's POC here. And I'm like,
it's a good voice.
Yeah. Like like, you need to be actively anti-racist to get people to feel comfortable in your space. And once you do that, people will start coming. Yeah, you'll lose people. Circling back to the beginning of this question, like, yeah, you're going to lose people. You're going to lose a lot of people who are either okay with this non-existent middle ground where they're like, oh, I'm not racist, but they don't do anything to boost marginalized voices. Yeah, you'll lose them. You'll make them uncomfortable. You'll lose people. But in the end, if your space actually is successfully diversified, you'll get a lot more people because there's a lot of us. There are a lot of us out here, and we love supporting projects and streams with great people on them. And if you want those great people in your space, you need to make that space welcoming.
Totally.
Are you part of the solution?
Exactly.
There you go.
And if you have a lot of power, and on social media, that unfortunately means numbers. If you have a lot of followers, you can boost us, like boost our voices. You can don't speak for us. Let us speak for ourselves, but boost our voices, retweet our stuff. I said in the chat, but if you want to see more marginalized people on your feed, you need to tell the algorithm that that's what you want to see. So that means interacting with our stuff, like, comment, retweets, and then if you do that enough to enough marginalized people, you will start seeing more of our content on your timeline. If you want to find more of us, another suggestion I have is find a marginalized person, look at who they're following, because oftentimes we will all be following each other. Like, look at who we're following, and then you can find more of us, and then you can daisy chain that all the way around. You can find the whole community. So much POC, queer, etc. We're all out here. You just need to like do a little work, because sometimes people just want to sit back and do nothing and hope that stuff changes, but that's not how that's gonna happen. This is a motherfucking revolution, man. Like,
Yeah, I want to put a positive spin on this. A year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, being in the space and and trying to curate, it was like 20 people that you would see constantly on your timeline. Now it's more than tripled. There's new voices coming in every single day. It's wonderful to see this shift, this change in the community, and how loud people are becoming. So
yeah, I've noticed that too. It's so nice. Thank you
I
for
have
being here.
one piece of free advice. One last piece of free advice. Totally free. Just
Hold
make
on,
sure you
get
give
my
money.
$20 ready to send to you for
Yeah.
Yeah, I got
Uh,
my pen and paper. Write this down. Write this
if-
down.
if you start not seeing someone you followed, that likely means that they are still tweeting. The algorithm has said that they're not around. So if, for example, you see HPAEOATI and you're like, I haven't seen that voice in a while, type in their name on the top of the search bar and find what they're tweeting recently, retweet the shit out of that, because that's how you trick the algorithm. Same thing with Instagram. Same thing with any social media ever. If you see sudden silence, it's likely we're not being silent. If we are being silent, we announce that ahead of time as a day of silence. Unless we're doing that, we're likely still around. Look for us. Remember, don't just trust the algorithm. Trust your gut. Look for us.
Look at this. I searched POC tabletop RPG and look, there's a lot of people here.
Literally, that's
Look
all
at
you have to
this.
do. 100%.
There's so many people. Look at all these people. Wow.
Oh my goodness! How unprecedented.
What? There are people of color in my TTRPGs? More likely than you think. Thank you for that.
Melanin on Twitter?
What?
It's a demonstration.
Thank you for that free
Demonstrations.
advice, Norden Ali. And I think as a way to sort of maybe introduce ourselves, Norden Ali, if you would like to give a quick plug to your socials, and then if we bounce it around to everyone else, maybe your parting thoughts for everyone else, maybe either a piece of advice or like final thoughts on Representing Nerd Life or what you're looking forward to in the future of tabletop gaming in terms of diversity, etc. So go ahead, Norden Ali.
Yeah, so my pronouns are he, him. My name is Norden Ali, and you can find me online at Werewolf Feels. My final thoughts in this? It seems daunting at the start. Whether you're trying to enter a space, trying to create a space, or just trying to curate a space. But trust me, the moment you get the ball rolling, you're going to realize that the rules are a lot simpler than you thought. Cappy, you want to take it next?
Sure. Yeah. So hello. My name is Christian. I go by Kappa in the TTRPG spaces. You can also use Christian. I don't fucking care. You can find me on Twitter at the Kappa Chris. And like we've been constantly saying, we're here. We're not that hard to find. Remember to unmute your mic because these spaces are needed. With these spaces, more than needed, they're essential. They're required. They're mandatory at this point. Let's make sure we do the homework.
Thank you, Kappa. Let's pass introductions along to Kalia.
Yeah, so it is Kalia. Fun fact, HP AEOATI is an acronym. It stands for High Priestess and Empress of all that is.
Eminence.
You can call me HP for short.
That's right.
So it's hilarious because people think HP and think hit points or whatever. But no, it's a definite intentional over the top acronym. It's great. So I stream with Dicey Amazons. My show, A Blurt of This and That, is every Tuesday at 7 Central. I talk news, comics, poetry. I end every stream with poetry. And it's a really great time to laugh and rant and it's talking to chat, who is mostly BIMPOC, if we're being honest. Last thoughts. Else that was said, take advantage of what you have. Take advantage. You are not as isolated as it feels, and I know it feels isolated, but you're not. There are queer people of color. There are so many people. Like, I have to think harder now about the straight people in my life than I do. I'm like, well, everybody's queer. Like, I don't, and that's because I've curated my life that way. I want to be surrounded by people who are like me and support me and understand when I say things. So take advantage. But I'm so glad you are here. If you have $5 extra and you haven't yet, throw it in the bucket. Throw it in the bucket. I'm so excited that we're already making so far progress. And I hope it gets up to 5,000 by the end of all of this. I really do. So thanks again for having me here. Check me out, Dicey Amazons. Dicey Amazons, a blurred of this and that. You can also Google search that because it'll come up. A blurred of this and that, Black Nerd, if anybody wasn't aware of that pairing. Black and nerd blurred. So I hope to see some new faces in chat. Follow me on the Twitters.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And last but not least, Jay.
Hello. I'm gonna start off with my last piece of advice, and that is that, and this is also just something I wanted to tell myself. It's something that I would tell you all as well. Being of marginalized identities, oftentimes you will be asked to be on panels talking specifically about your identity, and that is totally fine. Like that's great, especially if they're giving you the space to do so. But also that is not all that you/we can do. And you should be on these panels as long as you want to be on these panels. But know that you deserve to also be on panels about the stuff that you are passionate about. Like I don't exist as a queer, trans, neurodivergent person of color to only talk about that part of my identity, because I am also an artist. I'm also a creative writer. I am also a voice actor. I do sensitivity reading, but and that's something I enjoy doing. Pay me and I'll tell you stuff. I will educate you. But I can do so much more. And this would be my message to all the POC or other marginalized people out there. Like you can do more, and you should be able to be given space to talk about more than just your identities. I'm not sure if I said that in the best way, but hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down here. But yeah, like do that as long as you're comfortable, but just know that it is okay to start turning those down and moving on and doing other things, and that's completely fine. Yes, I am Jay or Nala. I use they, them pronouns. You can find me on Twitter at NalaWoo. My art Twitter is at NalaDraws, and I am NalaDraws literally everywhere. If you Google NalaDraws, you will find me. Great. As I said, I am a freelance illustrator. I specialize in fantasy illustration, character, costume design, and concept art for animation or games. I'm looking for freelance opportunities come this summer. I'm graduating with a BFA in illustration in November, and then I'll be looking for full-time work. So if you have any leads, please let me know, because I would love a job. And besides art, one last thing. At Knowledge Draws, add yourself to my mailing list. I'm going to be doing Pride commissions this June, hopefully. So you can get a illustration of your character or yourself with some fun pride flag backgrounds, etc., that kind of thing. Besides art, I do voice acting and writing and sensitivity reading, like I mentioned. I do lots of stuff. I'd love to work with you. And I think that is it from me. I am always down to talk. Yeah. Hire me to draw you or be on your projects. If you put me on your projects, I promise I will make it gay.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being such amazing panelists. Again, follow all of us on Twitter. And thank you, chat, for smashing us past $1,500 by the end of this particular panel. Wow, y'all are amazing. What? Thank you. All of this money is going to go to amazing causes. So stay tuned. We are going to transition over to a BRB screen for our third and final panel for tonight, which is going to be language, race, and performance, where panelists will discuss the connections and distinctions between language, identity, and roleplay games. So we will be back with that in just about 5 to 10 minutes. Stay in chat. Tell all your white friends to come and give us money. Basically, like, not
give
gonna lie.
us your money.
Give us your money for charity.
It's only free labor if you don't pay for it. I'm just saying.
All right, let's give a digital round of applause to these amazing panelists. Thank you all so much for talking, giving us your labor, and speaking. We will be back. See you all in about 10 minutes, and peace.